Good morning, Coach. How are you doing? How's everything with the hurricane right now?
It's going okay, Gary. I moved up to Columbia for a couple of days to get away from it. Biggest thing I think would be power outages and some flooding down there on the coast. The other thing is it's spawning, spawning some tornadoes, and I'm sure that's a concern, across the inlands. But so far, so good, and I'm probably going to go back down tomorrow and hopefully find it in good shape.
I hope so. We'll keep our fingers crossed. That's for sure. Before we look ahead, let's look back at that first big weekend because there were some surprises to say the least. Let's start with the biggest one. And listen, I understand what can happen in the football game. I know you do as a coach, and that's why coaches say you don't take anybody for granted. But still, I mean, Georgia State 2-10 a year ago. Of course, Coach Elliott, well, the head coach there, but they come in Knoxville, 4 touchdown underdogs, and not just do they win the game. I thought physically they whipped Tennessee. There are losses, and then there are ones that to me are just that you just can't explain, and that's one of those games. I mean, how in the world does that happen? First game for Tennessee at home, and they get whipped by a 4 touchdown underdog.
I saw very little of it except for replays because it was on at the same time. Another game I was following more closely. And it's one of those games, where you right down to the wire, you still think you're going to win and close the thing out. And all of a sudden, Georgia State made the plays and Tennessee didn't. But I think, the biggest thing that shocked me was the difference in the rushing yardage. I think Georgia State went over 200 yards and Tennessee didn't even make 100 yards. And overall, you have to wonder, is that something to do with the line of scrimmage? But I'm sure it's a very disappointing loss. A lot of teams recover from these opening losses against inferior opponents, and some don't. But I think it's going to be tough, and tough thing to get your confidence back and get going. Hopefully, they play BYU. I think this weekend. That's a decent opponent, but sort of an equal opponent, and that'll give them a chance to right the ship and get it going.
All right, more bad news for the SEC, and of course the program that you last coached for, South Carolina, and Will Muschamp, and I had I do picks for fun against the point spread, and I'd taken North Carolina in the points. I thought 10 points were too many. I didn't expect North Carolina to necessarily win the game, but they did it with a dominant fourth quarter. South Carolina really was in good shape going to the fourth quarter in that game, and couldn't get much done. And here's Mack Brown back, and for Will Muschamp having coached under Mack Brown and at one time been the head coach in waiting at Texas, this was a game that he wanted to win for a lot of reasons. How disappointing was that performance by South Carolina, knowing that they've got the schedule ahead of them that they do, that they lose the opener in Charlotte to another team that was just 2-10 a year ago?
Well, it's obviously on that schedule, as hard as it is, every loss that you should maybe have won becomes paramount. But I think more concerning is, they had to be disappointed, and I haven't been over there in 2 or 3 years, but they've recruited well, and they've straightened out the roster. They've got depth. They really felt good about their football team coming in. You got a 4-year starter at quarterback. You got a really good core of receivers. They added a running back, Feaster. Defensively, they were just deeper, and they felt like they were a lot deeper up front, especially, and they had better players in the secondary. But the bottom line is, I think their main objectives coming in this year would be to get their rushing yardage up, to get better at taking the ball away on defense, and they had to learn how to stop the run somehow consistently. And all 3 of those things went the wrong way in that opening ball game. Now, I think North Carolina may be a little better than people think they are, but still, when you start a true freshman quarterback and he puts up 483 yards, and 2 of those drives were over 90 yards, it begs the question, where are the playmakers? Where's the consistency? And the 3 things I think that really 3 areas that they really needed to improve on based upon that opening game, it has not changed.
Now they get Charleston Southern at home this weekend, but the big news now, regarding the Gamecocks is you think you've got a top tier SEC veteran quarterback in Jake Bentley, and just like that, he's gone. And now you turn to a true freshman, Ryan Helinski. Now, granted, he was very highly recruited. He's got a lot of talent. I guess it's good that you get Charleston Southern to break him in against, but the whole, nature of this football team, Coach, is now completely different than it was a couple of weeks ago.
Absolutely. And I think even more scary, they're one play away from the third quarterback, and he's a great athlete, but they were actually looking at playing him at some different positions to get the ball in his hand. So obviously it's tough to lose a guy with Bentley's experience. He's had times where he hasn't played all that well, but he's still been the most consistent leader for him. The players really had confidence in him. And some of his problems were not his problems. I mean, the ground game's been very average, and the receivers have dropped some balls at times that are just unexcusable. Protection has broken down occasionally. Will alluded to the fact he thought some routes were not run correctly or at the right depth or the right break. I mean, all of these things make the quarterback look like he's not functioning, and what it is, he's a victim of the play around him. You know, Clemson's quarterback, for his standards, didn't play well the opening game, but it didn't matter because they, you know, the running backs running for 200-plus yards, and they're protecting the kid, and then just, you know, the players around the quarterback have to play well too, or he's not going to look good. But I think that's probably their least of their problems. I think Helinski, especially this week, Helinski is very capable of running the offense, very capable of taking them down the field and beating an opponent such as Charleston Southern. The other areas I was talking about, I just think I know that Will is disappointed. I think they're better than they played, and I think that he's probably looking for some improvement in a lot of areas, not just the quarterback play.
All right, I do want to get to the games coming up, but just a quick thought on Missouri. Kelly Bryant lit it up with over 400 yards passing, but they had mistakes and turnovers, and they go to Wyoming and get beat. Of course, as a former coach, I wonder what you thought about the schedule maker there, letting Missouri open the season at Wyoming. That was curious to me from the get-go.
I agree. And sometimes these things are done way in advance. But when my 4-year tenure at Mississippi State, we played UAB in Birmingham one time.
Wow.
And that is not what you do with the Southeastern Conference program. I don't care if it costs $500,000 or whatever else you got to do. Bring them to your place. You know, play like the conference and schedule like the conference and carry yourself like the conference. I think it matters. But still, I think they should have gone over there and won that ball game. But as you already pointed out, the huge difference is Wyoming took care of the ball, did not have a single turnover. And Kelly Bryant put up some big-time stats, but he had a fumble and an interception, 2 of their 3 turnovers. And it was enough that they got beat in a close ball game on the road.
For Alabama, I thought the after a sluggish first quarter, they got those 4 suspended players back and got into rhythm offensively, which we expected. But I thought the big story was the defense. When you start a true freshman nose tackle and 2 true freshman inside linebackers right up the middle of your defense, and you hold Duke to 204 total yards and 3 points, how impressive was that performance by those 3 freshmen there? And in fact, DJ Dell, the nose tackle, was the co-SEC Defensive Lineman of the Week.
Yeah, totally agree. I know that's a very, very positive thing for them. And I'm not sure how good Duke is this year. Who knows? They lost an NFL quarterback from that team last year. Looks like the kid may play quite a bit or start in the NFL. So they probably got some rebuilding going on in several areas. But still, to have that dominant performance against a solid ACC offense is still pretty impressive. And with all the injuries and things they've had to deal with, not only does that hurt your depth chart, but it's very distracting. So, especially young players, but for all their defensive players to go in and play that well, I think it's got to be an encouraging sign.
And for Auburn, man, give them credit. I mean, I was coming back from Atlanta, but I was monitoring the game on my phone, and then I watched it back Sunday. And, if you watch the game, Oregon should have put that thing away, but they didn't. And Bo Nix did what he was given the job to do, and that's leading him to a big victory. You look at the stat line: 13 of 31, 177 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. It doesn't tell the story. That last drive was something special, and you could see, just like his dad, Patrick, he's got the clutch gene, doesn't he?
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to coach against Patrick.
Right,
but
yeah.
They both do. They have a similar personality to them from what little I could observe on TV. The young man had 2 or 3 chances to panic, lose his poise, start pressing, trying to make plays he couldn't make or failing to make plays he should have made. And like you said, when it came down to the critical time in the game, he played a little bit more like a junior than he did like a freshman. And it was a huge win for him, especially in a come from behind, especially starting a true freshman quarterback. And then Oregon supposedly being ranked in the top 15, 20 teams in the nation. That's a really good win for Auburn. The defense played very well. And I think the quarterback thing is a bright spot for him. And if he continues to improve, you can just see that it's going to really make the difference in their football team.
No doubt about it. All right, let's get to the games this week. Just real quickly on Alabama, from a coaching perspective, I want to get your opinion. You're playing an outmanned opponent. There's just no way around it. I mean, Alabama's going to win the game. The only question is by how much. But you've got your SEC opener next week at South Carolina. I guess there's a couple questions I have for you. If the game's over at halftime, how long do you play your starters? Of course, you got a bunch of young freshmen that they're playing not just as starters, but overall they're going to play double-digit freshmen. What are you looking to get out of this game? I know Saban always says you want to improve, but you don't want to get anybody hurt. I guess you want to try to work on some areas with your football team that maybe you think are deficient, and I guess wrap this thing up as quick as you can and get ready for next week. Is that the way, from a coaching standpoint, you approach it?
Yeah, I think all of the above, as you said, but coming into the game, coaches, believe it or not, I don't care who they're playing, you're taking the same approach, same mental approach, same organizational approach, same logistical approach. You want to go in and play just like you're getting ready to line up against Auburn. And if you don't, it's an indication that you're not mature enough to handle the situation. And that's something that's very important to coaches, is to see a team that can handle not only adversity, but sometimes when you don't have to play your best to beat an opponent, you want the team to still play their best. I think, injuries are always a concern, but, they could have gotten somebody hurt Tuesday, and it happened to them in practice the other day. So you can't approach it that we don't want to get somebody hurt. But once the ball game's under control, I think everybody likes to play as many players as they can, not only as a reward for them, but you want to develop some depth. And you want to, sometimes take it off of your starters a little bit and save some of that physicality and, avoid some of the nagging bumps and bruises as much as any kind of season-ending injury.
Couple of huge games that we're going to get to in a moment. But for Auburn, unlike Alabama, they're coming off a huge emotional game, and they'll be home as well Saturday night. But Tulane is a competent team. You've been through this before when you have a huge victory, and then you come back and you play a team that everybody expects you to beat, but they're not bad. Do you worry at all about a little bit of a letdown if you're Gus Malzahn?
Wouldn't think so. And I think coming home, being the first home game, it puts that environment where everybody knows, hey, this is a big-time game. So at least they're not playing a team that is not capable of scoring and putting some stops on them and challenging them a little bit. I wouldn't see a huge letdown. I'm not sure they'll play their best ball game. Who knows? You never do know. But I think as long as they take care of the football on offense and they keep playing as physical as they are on defense, this should be a pretty sound win for them. And I think they've got it spread at about 18 points, and I would think that at least.
All right, let's get to the two marquee games for SEC teams. Well, before we do that, let's go back to Tennessee, because this is critical now for them. And BYU is another one of these teams that, they're not great, but I think based on what I saw from Tennessee the first week of the season, if they don't make some improvement and get themselves ready to play, they could lose this one as well. How big is this game, not just for Tennessee, the football team, but for head coach Jeremy Pruitt?
Well, I think it's huge. And I'm a Pruitt fan. I've talked about that before. He worked with us as a student coach and grad assistant way back when Coach Stallings was there. But he's got a fantastic track record. There's no question his capabilities, his qualifications. He's a good football coach. The problem is, he inherited a very, very, almost damaged football team personnel-wise. And I'm not sure they've gotten it in recruiting and gotten it back to where it's even close. So teams like BYU are going to be a huge challenge because they just don't have the playmakers that they can go out and play, not their best game and still have a chance to win it. So I think it's extremely important. And not to pile on these things, they've had a lot of off-the-field stuff in the news lately. And sometimes when you see a lot of that, young people are going to do some things that, you can't explain. But when you have several instances of it in an off-season and leading into the season, it just tells you sometimes kids' priorities and their focus are not on the right things. I hope that's not one of the issues, because those things are hard to clean up. You got to remove some of your depth chart, and you got to bring in more players, and it's just a perpetual circle of never reaching experience and talent and so forth that you got to have to win in that league. I've got a real close friend that played up there who was in the coaching profession, and we were real close and just talking to how Tennessee used to be such a power, a national power in a recruiting aspect when they would go in a living room. I mean, when you'd go on that campus, it was so impressive. But everybody has built facilities now that rival Tennessee and Neyland Stadium. And so that advantage is gone. The recruiting base, from a 300-mile radius has never been real good. You got to go down in Georgia and get players out of Georgia to start off as a home base. But it's just, I don't know, it's in such a tough situation right now. The big thing is I know it's hard to be patient, but they better be patient with him, because if they make another change, it's just going to keep going in the wrong direction, in my opinion.
All right, let's get to the two really big games that involve conference teams. Let's start with A&M and Clemson. A&M last year took Clemson obviously down to the wire, but that was in College Station. Now they go into Death Valley. They're jacked up. I mean, you could hear it from their players spouting off a little bit this week. I'm sure Jimbo Fisher's talked to them about that. For Clemson, now this has become business as usual. You defend your home turf. They're the number one ranked team in the country. They're defending national champions, but Texas A&M, it appears, has enough talent and athletes to make this certainly a competitive game. Do you give the Aggies any chance of actually pulling the upset here and winning the game?
Oh, sure, there's a chance, absolutely. And they got good enough players they could beat Clemson on any given day, but they're not the best football team in this game. Now, I do think there are a couple of things. They played them well enough last year. Probably could have beat them, and maybe should have beat them at one point in the game. They didn't make the plays offensively. They could have taken a lead, and that was, of course, at Texas A&M. And then, Trevor was not the starter at that time, so it could have had something to do with that change. So they're still playing a really good Clemson team, but maybe a little bit different Clemson team than they played last year. But because it's early in the year, and because Clemson's got some young guys up in that defensive front, I don't think there's any question Texas A&M got the ability to score with them if they could just slow that running back down a little bit.
LSU and Texas. Saturday night in Austin, Texas rolled Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Like any team that beats a powerful SEC team, they've gotten a lot of residual out of that. And in this case, Tom Herman was asked this week. I liked his answer about playing the SEC and how if it is the best league. And he said, I'm not worried about that. It's not for me to judge. We're playing LSU, which he's right. You're playing a football team, not a conference, but still a lot of conference pride on the line. This is going to be a highly contested game. I think both of these teams are going to be a little chippy. But LSU, with Joe Burrow, and I know they didn't have a great opponent last week, but we know how good they are on defense, Coach, and have been for a while. If this offense is anything like it looked last week, they're going to be hard to handle, in my opinion, and I think they'll go in there and win the football game. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they're a better football team, and I think, if they play at home, and I think, but anyhow, that's almost irrelevant. But I just thought, like you said, the most impressive thing about LSU's opening game is the way they were able to throw the football, 30 of 39, 350 yards. And Georgia Southern is not a great Power 5 football team, but they've been very, very competitive with anybody they've played over the past 10 or 15 years. So that they weren't just throwing it around in pass perimeter, and that's an encouraging sign. Obviously, that win over Georgia Southern was very impressive. They played well. Statistically, it really looked good. But nobody's going to really say LSU's back because they beat Georgia Southern. But now a win over Texas right now, I think puts them in the conversation for getting one of the playoff games and gets kids focused every week on how important each win is. But it's a big, big game, and I think an LSU win would really put them in a strong position.
Yeah, it is in Austin, Coach. Texas is at home in this one.
Austin, okay.
Yeah, on Saturday night. All right, one more game I'm going to ask you about, just because it's one of those interesting games between two Power 5 conference teams. Obviously, Vanderbilt, took it on the chin at home against Georgia, but a lot of teams will have that happen to them. Purdue got upset in their opener. Vanderbilt at Purdue. This is one of those games that it'll be entertaining. It's an early kick up there in West Lafayette. You think Vanderbilt's got a chance to go in there on the road and win that game?
I think they do. Obviously, Vandy's been competitive with most of the people in the SEC, and although they got hit pretty good last week, I think that they've got a decent football team. I don't know much about Purdue right now, and so I'm speaking out of ignorance, but it'd be tough to go up there and beat them on the road. I think they're a touchdown underdog. But they've got a good football team this year. They lost a really good quarterback, but they've got a good football team this year, and I think they can beat anybody on a given day. They're going to have to play better than they did against Georgia, though.
And Arkansas at Ole Miss, if you're these two teams, I think you're both looking at this game saying this is one we got to win in this league. Only one can win it, but I think both teams approach it as this is a must-win based on where they're at in the conference with who they got left on the schedule.
Yeah, well, now Ole Miss has been just shattered by that NCAA mess, and it's understandable how they're having to kind of put the thing back together. Arkansas, on the other hand, is just a mystery. I mean, I wouldn't say it was Tennessee 15 years ago, but this was a national power football program, and right now they're just not even competitive in the conference, and evidently the roster is decimated. I know Chad does a heck of a job. He's hired good coaches. They've recruited hard, but I tell you, they're a very average football team for a place that's had some years where they've been nationally right in the picture. And so it's just kind of a mystery. But the loser of this game has got to really, they've got to almost start at point zero and figure out how we're going to get this thing built back up.
And two of your former schools play on Saturday. Southern Miss is at Mississippi State. You and I, of course, you coached there and lived there. I lived and worked in broadcasting in Mississippi. People outside that state don't realize when Southern Miss gets a crack at either Ole Miss or Mississippi State, it's a big deal in that state.
Yeah, when my 2 years I coached there with Curly Hallman, and we played Mississippi State both years, and we split with them. We beat them in Jackson, and they came down and upset us, and it was an upset. We had just beaten Florida State, #1 team in the nation, on the road at the Gator Bowl Stadium. And came back, and Mississippi State upset us, and it really hurt our season because we had Brett and had a good defense, and we had a chance to win 9 or 10 again. We won 10 the first year. So Southern Miss, I mean, their history, they feel like they can compete with these guys, and they'll go in there and play that way. But I do think the rosters, they've changed a lot. Mississippi State, I think, is a lot better football team than Southern Miss if they just play well.
All right, Coach. Great stuff as always. Stay safe up there in South Carolina, and we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good, Gary.